In this episode, we have the privilege of sitting down with Tuli Kamati from the Khomas region in Namibia. She has an adventurous soul and is a beacon of hope regarding advocacy. Growing up in southern part of Namibia, Tuli's childhood was marked by the harsh realities of racism in a predominantly white environment. However, amidst these challenges, she gleaned invaluable wisdom from her father about conflict resolution and togetherness, laying the foundation for her journey ahead. Today, Tuli is the director of Reproductive Justice Namibia, and she passionately advocates for just public policy surrounding reproductive rights. Drawing from her upbringing, she approaches her work with lawmakers with a unique perspective rooted in compassion and understanding. Not content with solely advocating for change on the policy front, Tuli is also pursuing her medical studies. Her goal is to combine public policy as a doctor with social justice, something I believe we can all admire. Keep listening as we explore Tuli's inspiring journey. Tuli, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. What a lovely
It's
introduction.
wonderful to Yes, it's wonderful to have you, and I'm super eager to dive in and learn more about your story. Are you ready to go?
Already.
Great. As we were getting to know each other, you made it clear that you don't like to be the center of attention. Rather, you'd like to make the center of attention be on other people. That sounds pretty altruistic to me. Do you consider yourself to be an altruistic person?
Yes, I do. I always say that everything I do or everything that I envision for the world is pretty idealistic. So certain things I always say, in a perfect world, it would be like this. So yes, I do believe I'm pretty altruistic, yes.
Yes, I got that really strong sense in talking to you that that was the case. Where do you think that sense of altruism came from? Is it part of your upbringing? Is it just part of your DNA? What makes you so altruistic?
I think it's a combination of both, given my upbringing with parents who really instilled in me the character of working hard, especially my dad, my mom, my brothers. All of them really inspired me to work hard. So, my dad is in law enforcement or was in law enforcement since he's retired. And he taught me so much about how you want to see the world and what it is, leaving the world a little bit better than just how you found it. And I get that he lived through a war. So I realized that that's how he passed it on to me as well.
What kind of lessons did your dad teach you? Can you think of an example or a category of things he taught you?
So I think a pretty interesting story would be when I was around 7 or 8. My father taught me the SWOT analysis. At the time, I obviously did not even think that that's something that that's important in life. But as I've grown older, and even with college, university studies, that's something that's pretty integral to your learning, to how you resolve conflict, to how you approach matters. So that's one of the things that he really taught me, the SWOT analysis, and also my love for books, just not
Hmm.
nonfiction but fiction as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you still use that SWOT analysis today in determining your strengths and weaknesses and the opportunities and challenges in front of you?
Yes, I really do. It's one of the things that I use even in my work and in my personal life. Sometimes I'm very strict with myself, especially even when I'm going shopping. I always make sure, and this is something that my housemate really hates. They hate window shopping. And I need to window shop in order to know what we're going to get and how much it costs. Is this something that we're going to get? For example, if we're looking at stoves, is how well does it work? How does it fit into our budget? How does it fit into the aesthetic of our kitchen, for example? So sometimes it can get a bit annoying, but it's something that I really use day to day. And sometimes I forget that, oh, what I just did was the SWOT analysis. So yes, it's definitely something I do and use in my day to day.
That's interesting. Well, your father was very much in the forefront of thinking about teaching you how to make wise decisions and analyze things before you act at a very early age. Sounds like a very powerful lesson and a unique story for sure. Uh, how about your mother? Is she similar to your father or is she different?
My mom and dad couldn't be any more different. My mom is somewhat of, she's very traditional, very set in her ways, but also very kind, and she is part of the church. So she applies those Christian values so well in the sense that she has a big heart and she's always open and willing to help anyone. She is very inspiring, and I love that about her. She doesn't give up very easily. Though her and my dad have different educational backgrounds, different upbringings, my dad obviously is very much straightforward. He's a fixer. My mom would want to ruminate about something, she'd want to think about it. She is a typical, I don't like to say women are emotional or lack logic, because we don't. Emotions are logic. But she's that person who will think about something for a very long time and then act upon it, which is something that's also very, it teaches you a lot, not to just, your fight or flight instinct, especially growing up with a dad who's very much a fixer. It's taught me to sometimes take a step back and then think about something before I act on it.
We know you gleaned a lot of important lessons from your father. Can you think of an example of something you've learned from your mother that you've incorporated into who you are?
So for me, I turn 31 in June, which is, I believe, 2 months away. I have always been that person who, I always thought when I finished high school, immediately once I'm done, I would be, on this direct career path. But unfortunately, my career path or my academic journey has been quite long. I finished high school at like a year younger than the rest of my peers. Then I went
Hmm.
to college to do microbiology, bachelor's of science, and I didn't complete it. Then I pivoted into clinical nursing, got my diploma, then I pivoted into public health. And now I'm turning 31, and I am now studying to be a doctor. So a lot of my peers have gotten, jobs, they're working, they're not in the academic space anymore. So one of the things that she really inspired me with was she turned 50, and in our family she's the only one, like at least in my nuclear family, she's the only one who didn't really, finish high school the way she wanted to. She never got the opportunity to go to college or university. And so she went to university and graduated at 50. And so for me, that was something that was really inspiring, because you're still going to age, so you might as well have a medical degree at the end of it. So that's one of the things that she really taught me is, resilience and not giving up on a dream.
Great example. I'm glad I asked that question. I can see how you've incorporated both of their personalities into who you are today, which allows you to accomplish so much. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit more. You have a focus on reproductive rights and but also just really on young people. And this podcast is about, youth workers and people who work with young people. Why do you think you have a focus on helping young people? Where did that come from?
For me, like you said in your introduction, I come from a predominantly black country, but I grew up in a predominantly white town. My first encounter with oppression or bigotry was racism. And so for me, seeing some of my fellow learners at the time not being able to sort of fight back or articulate themselves well enough in the face of someone being very bigoted towards them, whether it was someone of higher authority like a teacher or a principal or a caretaker, whereas I was taught from home that, no one is allowed to subjugate you, especially if you are armed with the knowledge on how to navigate that situation. For me, I think that taught me so much about personhood, about community, building and forming these little communities amongst ourselves as like people of color in a predominantly black country, but in a predominantly white town. And also just with my mom, seeing her church work, how she would every Sunday after church, she would, cook for a certain family, visit a sick person, pray for someone, commune with her community in that way. I think that's what's taught me what community is, because that's becoming such a lost art in today's, world of me, me, me.
I completely agree with that. And I have a thought provoking question for you. You may not have the answer to this because it is a hypothetical,
Yeah.
but it seems like your experience of growing up in that environment with racism and being a minority person taught you compassion and caring and the importance of hearing other people. Do you think if you wouldn't have grown up in that environment or grew up in a different environment, would you still have the same social justice bend that you have to your personality? Do you think you'd still be focused on equality issues?
Probably not to the same degree to which I am involved in, because a lot of times, especially in the environment that I live in, a lot of times people don't really understand something unless I equate it to racism, right? So I could be having a conversation with a man about sexism, about, reproductive health rights, and he wouldn't necessarily understand why it's oppressive, why there needs to be laws and legislature to protect that right, until I tell him, imagine during apartheid or during colonialism, if you did not have the right to do ABCD. So I think I would not have the terminology or the lived experience to be able to equate op- that oppression to the rest of the work that I do, because I think sometimes people are only able to understand something when they personalize it.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting answer. And it is, I think, a clear indication that we are part of what our environment is as we are raised, combined with the people that we interact with and our genetics. And that definitely had an influence on you. And sometimes it's a negative thing that creates a positive outcome. So clearly, the experiences you had with racism were negative, but somehow you turned it into a positive thing. And that's what I find so cool about you and so many of the people we interview on this podcast is that they take adversity and turn it into something really positive. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much. I'm going to tell my niece you said I'm cool.
All right, sounds good. I don't know if that ages me or not, but okay. Well, let her know I say hi too. Okay. Tuli, we just have to take a short break. When we come back, I want to ask you more questions about your work with young people and what the future holds for you. So we'll be right back. Tuli, right before the break, we were talking about your life experiences and how they've shaped what you have become today. What do you think you've learned from young people along the way? The work you're doing now in advocacy and interacting with young people, what have they taught you about yourself? Because I think that's an important part of being a youth worker is we have to learn from the young people. What have you learned?
I have learned the art of respectability politics. I think as a millennial, that's something that we really, have a hard time unlearning, because in essence, we're raised by people who very much so drilled into us, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, thank you, please, even when you're addressing something that's quite sensitive or controversial. So my work with young people has really taught me, one, that there's certain things we can't respect our way into discussing it. We can't respect our way into having someone listen to us. So sometimes I have to say what it is. And those young girls and young boys, and in all their gender diversities, when they show up for the protests, they inspire me. They literally, I don't know, it was a phenomenon in the States, I know, with the song by Megan Thee Stallion and Cardi B. That song that was like very, very famous became a chant at one of our protests. And, people were very much focusing on the, lurid language or how crude it was. But if you listen to them, they're like, this is revolutionary to me and this is how I express myself. So instead of being constrained in a box, I think when it comes to respectability and how you speak to certain people, for example, a minister, a lawmaker, a policymaker, it's very easy to make yourself small when you enter that space. But they've really taught me the art of I have the right to be here. I have the right to speak to you and bring your attention to this cause. And however I need to do that, yes, I'm going to do it in a way that you understand that it's important. But if that doesn't work, I have other avenues of getting you to listen to me. And sometimes it's not a pretty picture, unfortunately.
Wonderful answer. And you're right, they're very inspiring and they do give us a sense of what we're doing is so important and we got to work really hard at it. When you're meeting with lawmakers and advocating for reproductive rights for all people there, do you bring the young people with you? Are they physically there in the meetings or are you acting as a representative of them?
So it's twofold. One of the things that we always do is, especially in our organization, is capacitation. So the youngest staff member in our team is actually should be 19 turning 20. That's quite young if you look at someone having the opportunity to meet with a lawmaker. But what we do is
Yes.
we always try and capacitate. So as director, I always ensure that there's someone with me. If someone has never been in that space before, I take that person along with me. And I always tell them if we're given the opportunity to ask questions, whether it's off the record, because most times we either record the meetings or we take very strict minutes so that we're able to report back to the people we're representing. So I would always take someone with me that can learn from that setting and ask questions as well, because sometimes there's something I didn't think about, for example. And it also just capacitates that person because capacity building is something that's very important, especially in the civil society space.
I do a lot of advocating with legislators and lawmakers here as well. And I know the importance of bringing a young person and their voice into the room with me. What do you think that they want uh, lawmakers to understand about them? What is the message you're getting from young people that you're trying to convey to lawmakers?
I think young people in general just want to be afforded the chance to live freely without any oppression. I think that's the one thing that I'm learning. A lot of times, especially in a country like Namibia, where poverty is so multidimensional, where the gap between the rich and the poor is so wide, people want to
Hmm.
live in a space where they can just, afford to buy their groceries, get a job, um, buy a house or afford housing, water, sanitation, healthcare, just basic needs. If people's basic needs are met, I think that's the main thing. Basic needs are met, then people will be fine and okay. But unfortunately, that's not happening and we're not being heard. And so, the one thing that I can say that young people really want is to live freely and to be able to live a livable. I think what I would equate it to is have a livable, life. Because right now, what's happening is not it.
I concur. I think it's the same thing here in the United States. It's very similar. And the more people we interview from people in different countries, the more we realize how similar the situations are everywhere. So, in your work with young people and advocating for reproductive rights, you've chosen that as kind of like your main point to focus on. Can you tell me why you chose reproductive rights and what about your situation that drove you into that particular arena to be an advocate for?
So I got involved with reproductive health rights, I think in 2020, because of a very brilliant person who, you know, opened this petition on change.org, I believe, where they were calling for the legalization of or the repealment of the Abortion and Sterilization Act of 1975. So that's initially how I got involved. Prior to that, I was very much so just amplifying the voices of the pro choice movement. I got involved in organizing the protests, amplifying the petition, ensuring that people were seeing it. And this was during like the pandemic. So it was very difficult to organize everyone to make sure that we're adhering to the codes, we're adhering to, social distancing. That's what really, really sparked my pivot into just broader social justice and bringing it in,
Yeah.
honing it into reproductive health rights. And also, just for me personally, I, I for 3 years, I think starting 2017, was, I started having health issues, health complications that affected school, that affected my life. And it took almost 3 years just to get, a definite diagnosis of like endometriosis. And then doing that research and finding out that, millions of women have this, but unfortunately it takes
Mm.
so long to get diagnosed. Sometimes it's only discovered during the autopsy. So there's a little bit of a
Mm.
personal motivation in this as well.
I think that's going to drive you even harder. You have such an altruistic sense for other people, and your willingness to give back, plus your personal experience with this, makes for the perfect advocate. You bring your own heart and your own experience into this, but then you just care so deeply for other people. I think that's great. When we were first getting to know each other, you were talking about togetherness as something that is really important. Can you just briefly talk about why togetherness is something that's in your vocabulary so strongly?
You can't do something by yourself or alone. And I think I've the more I try to do it by myself, the more I have so much more pushback. So for me, it started with learning how to ride a bike, for example. I thought I could, teach myself. But I had my best friend teach me, I had my friend teach me, I had my brothers teach me. So just from like growing up and having that little community, every single step that you take, sometimes people have this very, cynical worldview where they're like, I pulled myself up by the bootstraps, but I believe that no one can do that. I have so much community. I have so many. I always say that my friends are the family that I chose. And together with them, it's like they lift me up, they hold me up. When society is like, oh, she's turning 30, she doesn't have ABCD, they're like, look, you're worthy of love, respect, and everything else that is good in the world, regardless of your social status, regardless of your class, regardless of your education, regardless of if you have anything at all. So, community is the one thing that has helped me stay afloat. It's the one thing that has helped me push and push for the agenda of, pro-choice, of an anti-bigoted world. That's the one thing that has taught me so much, especially with the most oppressed communities are always the ones who are showing up for everyone else. So that is one thing that togetherness has taught me.
Beautifully said. And as if you're not doing enough already, you mentioned you're pursuing your medical degree to become a doctor.
Yes.
And I don't know how you do it. I know when we were first first met and getting to know each other, you said you don't sleep very much, and I believe that's probably very true because I don't know how you do everything that you do. But what kind of medicine are you hoping to get into, and how do you hope to use your medical training as a doctor to help facilitate this altruistic cause you're working on?
Initially, I wanted to be a heart surgeon, but I think since the work I've started doing and listening to women, listening to people with a capacity for pregnancy, and how sometimes that choice, is either taken from them or they're not able to, navigate that space of reproductive health care in a manner that's respectful, in a manner that's uh, provides a safe space for them. I've pivoted towards obstetrics and gynecology way more. I think that in itself sort of aligns with my social justice issues, specifically with having someone listen to you. It's very hard, to live in the society where a lot of times my pain scale on the daily could be, a 9 out of 10 if you ask me. But that's normal for me. And someone could have a pain scale out of 3,
Mm.
and that's not like normal for them. So I think just wanting to be in a profession or a specialty where I'm able to provide a safe space for everyone that I come into contact with. Yeah.
Well, good luck to you. I'm certain that you're going to do well. And there's no doubt that you're going to take everything that you have, all your abilities, all the incredible lessons that you're parents and other people around you who have been influential have poured into you, have made you into a person that is so good for everybody in your community and so good for everybody around the world. And I just know you're going to continue to just have great successes and bring your ability to help to a whole new level when you start being able to talk and provide medical services to people that aren't able to normally access them, or make it so there's policies around so people do have access to them. Nobody should have to live in pain. Nobody should have to live with an incomplete or inaccurate diagnosis. People deserve to have the health care that they need to be treated fairly and equitable in this world. And you are leading the charge on that. And so I want to thank you on behalf of all of our listeners for pouring everything that you have, sacrificing sleep, sacrificing your need to be in this, well, your desire or ability to be in the center, but putting other people's needs first. That truly is an admirable trait. And I'm glad that I got to know you. Thank you for being a guest on the Passionate Youth Worker podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Tuli, before we go, as you know, I always give the guest the last word. So, what words of wisdom or inspiration would you like to leave with our listeners?
So I thought long and hard about this. So I did write it down. I think the words that I would like to leave, the words of wisdom I'd like to leave is: kindness is the language of humanity that transcends barriers, connects hearts, and rebuilds bridges. It's not just an act, but a legacy that I want to build. And that is how I wish to transform the world.